Welcome to Just Relationships, the show that offers you concrete ways to make your relationships better. Whether it's your boss, your spouse, your children, or your friends, the quality of your relationships in life directly affects how you feel about yourself and the success you achieve. Your host, Dr. Duffy Spencer, a psychotherapist, telecoach, author, and seminar leader, will interview top experts to help you learn to manage this essential part of your life. And now, here's your host, Dr. Duffy Spencer.
Greetings to you. Well, a show called Just Relationships talks about your emotions. What are they? How are they? How do they feel in your body? Do you feel them in your body? Are you numb? So many people are so numb. Today we're going to talk about inherited emotions or legacy emotions, the kinds of things we learn to feel, would you believe? So if we learn to feel them, we can certainly unlearn to feel them. And I'm very, very pleased to have back as my guest Dr. Bradley Nelson. This is part 2 of a series with Dr. Bradley Nelson. I had invited him last year, and he was such a wonderful guest. I invited him back. I don't often do that. The name of his book is entitled The Emotion Code: How to Release Your Trapped Emotions for Abundant Health, Love, and Happiness. Welcome back, Dr. Bradley Nelson.
Well, thank you, Dr. Duffy Spencer. It's great to be back on your show.
Thank you so much. So did I get it right in terms of inherited emotions? I called it also legacy emotions.
Well, I think that calling them inherited emotions or legacy emotions, I think is absolutely correct. Here's what we have found. We talked on your last show about emotional energy and how when you're experiencing an intense emotion, that energy can become trapped in the body. And it's a little ball of energy from about the size of a baseball to the size of a softball. We all have emotional energy, but what we've discovered is that sometimes the emotional energy that we have, at least some of it, is inherited or has been passed down to us from our ancestors. So let me explain a little bit more about this. Some of the things that they have found scientifically about this is that, first of all, they've done studies with rats, and they found that if you put a rat into a maze, as it's going through the maze, if it receives a shock or something terrifying happens to it, and then it has children, they found that animals will pass down the energetic memory of something that was dangerous or difficult or traumatic. And they found that these memories in lower animals are passed down up to 14 generations. So you can take a great-great-great-grandchild of that rat and put it into that same maze, and as it's wandering through the maze, where it gets to the point where a great-great-great-grandpa was shocked or terrified, that rat will stop dead in its tracks because somehow it has this genetic or energetic memory of what happened, even though it's not a conscious memory in any way. It's a subconscious thing. Wow. They've also found, there was a book recently written about Holocaust survivors, and technically about the grandchildren of Holocaust survivors. And what they found is when they looked at all of the markers for stress and the markers for aging in the blood, they found that these people whose grandparents survived the Holocaust have sky-high levels of stress hormones and aging hormones and so on. And the only way that they could explain it was because of what the grandparents went through. Think about that.
Yes.
So what we have found is that we often inherit emotional energies from a parent. At the moment of conception, there is emotional energy that is somehow passed down to us, and we often experience then in our own lives some of the emotional baggage that our ancestors were carrying. And so I can share some stories with you about this. one of the most profound healing experiences that I had in my own life was actually a couple of years after the Emotion Code book came out. I asked my daughter, Natalie, to work on me, and she was in Seattle, and I was down near Las Vegas. But when you read the Emotion Code, you learn that it is probably the purest, simplest form of energy medicine that is available on Earth right now. And it's not bound by distance. That's one unique thing about energy, that it is not bound in any way by distance at all. And so we teach people how to do this at a distance. So I called her, asked her to work on me, and she started working on me. And right away, she found that as she's testing me remotely at a distance, and we're not on the phone, by the way. She's just working on me. It's a kind of a wireless connection that we use, but it involves no electronics of any kind, just the body.
Oh, my word.
What she found was that I had an inherited trapped emotion, and the inherited emotion was hopelessness. Now, when she discovered that, she started to feel really emotional herself, which is unusual for her. She's very analytical and very cut and dried. But she started feeling emotional. Well, she tested this, and she found that this had come from my father. I got it from my father, but he had gotten it at his conception from his mother, and she had gotten it from her mother, and it stayed in the mother's line, and it kept going back further and further and further until my daughter got back to about the late 1400s or so, because it was my grandmother, one of my grandmothers, from 22 generations ago. You can imagine. Now, when she arrived at that point of origin, suddenly she could feel the presence of this woman, this grandmother, standing right next to her. She could feel that she was there, and she could feel her emotions. She could feel how desperate this woman, this grandmother, was to have this emotional energy released from her posterity. And she could also feel how overwhelmed with gratitude this woman was that this was being done. Now, when my daughter released that emotional energy, she could feel it ripple through all those generations. And so here I am. I'm about 1,500 miles away. My daughter's working on me, and she releases this emotional energy of hopelessness that I had had all my life. Well, this was one of the most profound healing events that I've experienced, because all my life I have battled with hopelessness, but I never really was able to put my finger on it. During the time that I was writing the Emotion Code book, if anyone would have asked me to describe in one word how the project felt, I would, without any hesitation at all, have said it feels hopeless. It feels like the most hopeless project, but I'm continuing to do it. And every morning when I would get ready to start writing this book back then, I would have to spend half an hour to an hour psyching myself up, watching really positive things, listening to Tony Robbins or whoever, trying to overcome all this negative energy that I had. Now, Dr. Spencer, imagine that you live next to a factory. You were born next to this factory, and it's in operation 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It never takes a break. And there's a continual hum coming out of this factory. Well, after a month or two, you probably wouldn't really notice it. You just tune it out. And if it's been there your whole life, you wouldn't really recognize it anymore, except if that factory suddenly went out of business and closed their doors and the hum stopped, then you'd recognize it, right? The silence would be deafening, right?
Yeah.
And that is exactly how I felt. When that emotional energy of hopelessness was released from me, that I had received from all those 22 generations back, it was like the silence was deafening. It was like suddenly I recognized that background music of hopelessness, that low-level hope feeling that had been there playing in the background all my life, every waking moment of my entire life, suddenly that was gone. And that changed my life. And it changed the life of my daughter as well, because she is an artist, one of the most amazing oil painters that I've seen in my life. A phenomenal artist. But until that day, she had never painted anything. And you see, she had received that emotional energy of hopelessness from me when she was conceived. I had passed it to her. I got it from my dad. It was continuing on down the line, you see. And about a year after this was released, she had an art showing in Seattle, and all this art was just starting to pour out of her. Now, if you can imagine, think about your ancestors. What do you think they might have gone through? Did your ancestors go through anything difficult? You know, our ancestors, I think, all went through difficult times. Some of them were involved in wars, and some of them died in wars, and some of them were in the pogroms, and some of them were, had their villages destroyed, and all kinds of things happened. And so that energy, in the same way that a rat will pass somehow that terrifying event or that significant event that happened to its posterity, and that can be passed down, science now says up to 14 generations, we do the same thing, you see. We pass down our emotional baggage to our kids and their kids and their kids and their kids sometimes. And so you see, part of the reason why people struggle in this world and why they find it difficult to move ahead and find love and abundance and everything that they want, part of the reason for that is because they're dragging through life the emotional baggage of their ancestors, you see.
So, Dr. Bradley Nelson, my first thought and feeling is relief. It's not me. It's not mea culpa. And the second is, can it be true? Is it so as not to feel hopeless? If you inherit these emotions, you can release them?
Yes, you can. You can find them. You can release them. And let me share another story with you. There was, I speak a lot. I travel all over the world and speak. And I was at a group once. There were about 300 people in the audience, and there was a woman that came up out of the audience, and she had hip pain, and she'd seen several doctors for it. She'd had it for about a year, and it was bad enough that she had to walk with a limp, and it was bad enough that she literally had to manually lift her leg to get in or out of her car. And it wasn't getting any better. So she came up on the stage with me, and I tested her to see what was going on. And I found an imbalance, and I cleared that. And her pain was a 9 on a 0 to 10 scale, she said. So I cleared one thing, and the pain level went to a 4. And then the next thing that I tested her for, I tested to see, well, actually what came up, the next thing that came up was that she had an inherited trapped emotion. The emotion was fear. Mm-hmm. And she'd gotten it from her father, who'd gotten it from his father, who'd gotten it from his father. It went back 12 generations. And what we have found is that, you see, these ancestors of ours, even though they are passed on, they still seem to be alive and sentient, and they're just in kind of a different dimension or something, because what we find is that these ancestors seem to always show up when an emotional energy is about to be released from them. Because you see, when an emotion is inherited, no matter how many generations back it might have originated, when you release that emotional baggage on a living person, it also releases it from all of those ancestors that it passed down to or through. And so, and that might sound strange, but what I did is I tested her. I had her hold out her arm, and I asked her subconscious mind if those ancestors, those direct line ancestors, those grandfathers that had passed this emotional energy down to her, if they were there with us. And this is might seem very strange, but this is something that I've have kind of found out about, that these ancestors always seem to show up. And of course, we can't see them, right? I can't see them. But when I muscle test the person, we're asking their subconscious mind, and their subconscious mind knows.
So the muscle testing, Dr. Bradley Nelson, that's when you hold your arm out and the other person pushes down and it gives certain words, or holding a can of something, and it either is strong or weak. Mm-hmm.
Right, because that's how we tap into the subconscious mind, which is the most powerful computer in the known universe. So I got a yes answer that those grandfathers were there with us. And so I didn't think anything else about it. I thought, oh, that's interesting. I can't see anybody, but that's interesting. So I released the emotion, and the pain disappeared completely, and she's dancing around on the stage. Well, 90% of all the physical pain that we have is caused by emotional baggage, and sometimes part of it is inherited. So anyway, she went back and sat down, and I finished my talk there, finished my lecture, and went back to our booth. We had a booth there with a number of our staff people. And about a minute after I got back to the booth, a woman came up to the booth. And here's what she said. She said, Dr. Nelson, she said, I'm one of those people that has this ability to see spirits that other people don't see. And she said, I've had it all my life. And she said, it's I know that it's a gift, but it's kind of a blessing, and it's kind of a curse. But she said, I wanted you to know something. She said, when you were talking about those ancestors, I was seeing them on the stage. They were right up there on the stage. And just like you described, there were these 11 grandfathers. They were all there. But she said there was something else going on, and I don't know that you were aware of this. She said, what I saw was surrounding the stage were at least 200 spirits of this woman's unborn descendants. Or yet to be born descendants. And she said they were there rejoicing that they were not going to have to take on this crippling energy from her. And fascinating, right?
Fascinating, my goodness.
Right?
Wow.
So, yeah, it's really pretty interesting. There was another one. You know, this is a fascinating aspect of the emotion code that has just kind of come up over the last number of years. And there's another story that I can share with you, but I'm not sure how much time we have left.
We have about 10 minutes.
Okay. Well, we have time for this one then.
Okay.
There was a practitioner of ours. She was working on herself, and you can do that. You can release your own emotional baggage. She found that she had inherited a trapped emotion of shame, and she'd gotten this from her mother. And as she continued testing, she found that her mother had gotten this from her grandmother, who had gotten it from her mother, her great-grandmother. And at that point, all of a sudden, this woman materializes in her room, and it was her great-grandmother. And she told her what had happened. The emotion that this woman was about to release was the emotion of shame. And her grandmother told her the story, her great-grandmother. She said, and of course this woman has been dead for many, many years, but she said that what had happened was that she had been sexually abused for many, many years, starting as a child. And the shame of it was so great that she never breathed a word to a soul, never told anyone about it. She just carried that shame, and in fact, she lived to be an old woman and died around 1900 or so, and took the secret with her to the grave. And then all these over 100 years later, here's this great-granddaughter of hers who's about to release this energy, and that woman suddenly made her presence known because she was so moved, and the two of them wept together.
Wow.
Another amazing story is from Utah. There were a couple of women who came to a seminar that I taught, and on their way home in the car, they were working on each other, and they found that they had received this inherited emotional energy from their father. And all of a sudden, the car fills with the scent of cigar smoke. Now, their father smoked cigars, but he's been dead for 10 years. And all of a sudden, they can smell their dad. He's in the car with them. And so they couldn't see him, but they could smell that he was there. And so the older of these two girls told me that they prayed and asked if it was okay if they worked on him directly since he was in the car with them. And you can do this. It isn't something that we actually teach, but they were able to release some emotional energy from their father. And here's the story. These two girls were young, and they moved from some other place to Salt Lake City, Utah. And they started to get friends that were members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. They used to be referred to as the Mormons. And they wanted to join the Mormon Church. Well, their father was very devout in some other religion, and he was absolutely dead set against it. And so he denied them permission. Well, all their friends were members of this particular church, and so they wanted to join the church. And so when the younger of the two daughters turned 18, they defied their father's wishes, and they joined the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And so the father then lived for about another 10 years or so. And when I met these two girls, they were, I think, in their early 50s. But anyway, he lived maybe another 20 or so years or something. I think he'd been dead 10 years when this happened. Anyway, until the day that he died, their father was very dismissive of them and very angry at them. And they would go to him and they'd say, "Dad, look, we're trying to do good things. We're trying to live the Christian lifestyle." And he wasn't having any of it. And then all of a sudden he died with all of this unresolved. And so now, here all these years later, he's been dead all these years, 10 years or so. All of a sudden, here he is in the car with them. Now, this might sound crazy, but these two women seemed very, very rational to me. And the older of the two was the one who bore the brunt of her father's ill will because he blamed her for losing, he felt, his younger daughter and both of them to this strange religion, he thought. So they started working on him and releasing some emotional energy. And when they got to a certain point, the older of these two women told me that she felt him wrap his arms around her from behind and sob on her neck because he was so sorry that he had been so mean while he was alive. So we hear all kinds of amazing things from all over the world. We have people who now are certified in the Emotion Code in 77 countries around the world. That's almost 5,000 practitioners. And they're just finding that these inherited emotional energies are very, very real and that we all have them. And, you know, sometimes we just can't understand why we seem to feel a certain way, or why we have certain emotions that just seem to be difficult to get rid of, why we feel certain ways at certain times and we just don't get it. You know, why do certain things trigger me, and why is it so hard for me to get ahead in life? And sometimes it's because we're dragging through life not only our own emotional baggage, but also the emotional baggage that we inherited at conception. And sometimes that emotional energy can go back for many generations, you see.
Yeah, and Dr. Bradley Nelson, you're talking about very universal emotions like fear and hopelessness and anger and even rage. And I guess Jung would call this the collective unconscious as well.
Well, I think so, yes. I mean, the collective unconscious goes by lots of different names. Rupert Sheldrake would call it the morphic field. It might be called the light of Christ, or it might be called the database of all that is, or universal intelligence. It goes by different names depending on who you're talking to. But the reality of it is we are all connected, and we are always going to be connected to those ancestors of ours I believe for eternity. And I believe also that they are our angels. In fact, let me share one more story with you. A woman who is one of our staff practitioners, who was my executive assistant for many years, her name is Connie Barton. Connie grew up with a friend in Chicago, and her friend was one of those people that you run into once in a while who has the ability to see spirits. And it's kind of a gift that some people have, not many, but anyway, her friend always had that ability. So one day, Connie's in her late 50s when this happens, and so is her friend. Her friend comes out to visit her, and they're trying to catch up and everything. Well, Connie is a staff practitioner for us, and she works with people all over the world. And so she tells her friend, listen, I've got some sessions to do. I've got some people I need to work with. So why don't you just sit out here and read a magazine or something, and then I'll be done in a little while. And her friend said, well, if it's okay with you, I'd like to sit in the corner and be a fly on the wall and just see what you're doing now. And so Connie said, okay, that's fine. So her friend sits in the corner, and Connie works on all of these clients, 5 or 6 clients. And when she's done now, and she's doing this on her computer over Skype.
And Dr. Brad, yes. We have just 1 minute. Okay.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Well, when she was done, her friend said, Connie, I don't think you understand what's going on here. She said, when you offered that silent prayer and tried to connect and get help for that first person you were working with, she said, I saw spirits come in and stand behind you. And she said they were intently focused on helping you to help that person that you were trying to help. And when you were done with that person, those people disappeared, and some other angels came in when you offered that silent prayer for the next person and started to work on them. And she said, sometimes it was unborn people, sometimes it was ancestors, sometimes it was always somebody that was very connected to that person that you were trying to work on. So there's this invisible side, you see, and sometimes that manifests with the emotion code.
Wow, invisible side and good spirits, good loving spirits, right, Dr.
Yes.
Bradley Nelson? Well, everyone, if you are absolutely intrigued with this concept, go ahead and get yourself the Emotion Code by Dr. Bradley Nelson. Dr. Bradley, thank you so much for coming back on Just Relationships, and I wish you many blessings.
Thank you, Dr. Spencer.
Okay, and everybody, wishing you great relationships too. Bye-bye.